You're listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio.
Infinite diversity.
Live long and prosper, and welcome to Infinite Diversity, a Star Trek Universe podcast here on the BQN Podcast Collective. I'm your host for today, Chrissie, and joining me is my co-host, Thad. Thad, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. It's been a week or so since STLV, so I'm, still in the post-con blues where I wish I could be at STLV all the time. But other than that, I'm pretty good.
Yeah, I understand that. Well, today, we've talked about all of the Star Trek that's current. There's not a new episode that you missed, listeners, but we have Aaron Waltke with us to talk about Prodigy and other things. Welcome, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. Happy to be here. And I'm glad that we could finally make this happen after that inadvertent tease that we had a few weeks ago.
Yes.
For all you ED heads, or I don't know what your fans are called, diversifiers.
Never thought about that. I like that.
Diversifiers is kind of fun.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So for you long-term listeners out there, you may have heard me pop in randomly to this podcast when Thad apparently accidentally added me to a record calendar invite.
I swear it was accidental.
That I just assumed was legit because I was getting so many requests to promote Star Trek Prodigy. Oh. And so I showed up, and then everyone's like, "Oh, hi, Aaron. Why are you here?"
Well, as calendar filling as that may be to get all of those requests, that means things are going well, I feel like. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Star Trek Prodigy Season 2, I suppose we should put a spoiler alert at the top of this, not that you haven't been.
Oh,
absolutely.
Yep, spoiler alert.
If you haven't seen Star Trek Prodigy yet, especially Star Trek Prodigy Season 2, pause this, take a day off, binged all 20 episodes, or 40 episodes for that matter. Take a week off, and then come back to this podcast.
It is technically possible to watch all 40 in one day, as long as you don't care that much about sleep.
That is true. That's true. And technically possible is the best kind of possible.
All right. Well, before we jump further into our topic for the day, we'd like to take a moment to thank our Patreon patrons who make the show possible, particularly our associate producer, Carl Wonders. Listeners, you can hear your name listed as one of our associate producers for a monthly subscription of just $10 at patreon.com/BQN. And with a monthly Patreon subscription of just $5, you can join our BQN Star Trek script table reads. Watch your Patreon messages for information on these and other fun opportunities with your collective. So we do have one bit of news, and it's sad news. Patty Yasutake died at the age of 70 last week.
That for those who may not recognize the name, she was Nurse Alyssa Agawa on TNG.
And I loved her whenever I saw her show up on TNG. I think maybe when I was a kid, I enjoyed the fact that they would occasionally just pull someone out of the background and say, "Oh yeah, there's 1,000 people on this ship," and I think she made such a great addition to that sort of supplementary cast. I'm very sorry to hear of her passing.
And sounds like it was cancer, and that's unfortunate because 70 is too young to go. Our hearts reach out to her family and loved ones.
Yes, we grieve with you on that. Everybody, if you think something's going on, get it checked out. That's all I'll say. All right, well, so Aaron, tell us your Trek story. How did you get introduced to Trek?
I may have told this last time, or not literally last time, but the first time I was on.
Oh, I'm
podcast.
Sorry if I did that.
No, I don't remember.
It's
honestly.
been long enough that neither us nor our listeners have a strong memory of it, so it's fine.
It's new to everybody.
All right.
Yeah, my first contact with Star Trek, if you will, was one of my earliest memories as a human being. Was way I remember sitting on the couch with my dad, and it was very exciting, and I didn't know why, but there was the saucer separation, from the secondary hull or whatever, and the Jerry Goldsmith fanfare was playing, and I realized years later it was the premiere of Star Trek: The Next Generation that I was watching live way back in September of 1987. My dad was a huge Star Trek fan, obviously TOS at that time, and then it well on into TNG. It was sort of a way for us to bond in a lot of ways, because he was not what you would call a traditionally creative person, but he found other ways to be creative. But I think science fiction was kind of one thing that we kind of talk about and bond over, and it definitely stirred my imagination the way Gene Roddenberry was hoping it would. And then as I got a little older, when I was maybe 6 or 7, my parents both worked, and so sometimes they would drop me off at my aunt's house to be babysat, and she would just turn on like the local PBS affiliate, which for whatever reason during the weekdays they would play old TOS reruns, and so I think she thought it would be educational, but I was just there watching Khalifi death matches and Orion slave dances and all kinds of stuff, and I was like, this is crazy. But it was, even as a 6 or 7 year old, I think I was exposed to a lot of quote unquote classic television that way, and Star Trek was no exception. I recognized that 60s TV had a different aesthetic, but because I had very little to compare it to other than 80s television, it was just sort of like, oh, that's another type of TV I can watch. And so I was kind of onboarded at the right time, I think, to be exposed to all of it. And then obviously when Deep Space Nine came along, it's funny, initially I didn't watch it because I for whatever reason, I just was like, I'm too busy with TNG or whatever. and then I think after it had been out for a year or so, my local Fox station started airing it in syndication in order.
Oh, nice.
And so I think they would do 2 episodes a day. And so I got to basically binge watch through the first season and part of the second season at a time before there was a word for that. Like every day after school, I'd come home, watch 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine. It's like, oh, this is awesome. So a lot of the criticisms that people had at the time with it being quote unquote heavily serialized and among other things, I just completely missed that because I just watched it like it all as most Star Trek fans probably do now, which is just set it and forget it and watch it, it became, I think, one of my favorite Star Trek series because it was very much in many ways kind of like the Cheers bar of Star Trek, where you got to everyone came to Deep Space Nine and departed from it, but then it obviously getting swept up in the melodrama of Starfleet at war and kind of testing those darker bounds of what Star Trek could be, while still finding the kind of the light within, was all very exciting to me in a way that perhaps if I was older and on fan forums, I might have had more to complain about. But as just an isolated fan, I was like, this is awesome. Great. And it was funny because, like, beyond my dad, I didn't really have many people to talk about Star Trek with. It was just something, it was like almost like a communion for me, where I just got to enjoy it by myself, and I got to see my old friends Quark and Odo and Geordie LaForge every week, I didn't realize how that my sort of absorption of it was unusual until I started talking to people on the internet about it, and they're like, wow, you know a lot about Star Trek. I was like, do I thought everybody talked about Heisenberg compensators all the time.
I don't know, it sounds pretty normal to me.
And for a long time, I didn't even go to conventions or anything because I just wasn't sure if like that was my vibe per se. It wasn't that I had anything against them, but I was like, well, I don't really cosplay, and if what am I gonna go do? Just go up to like a stranger at a booth and buy merchandise with the no money I have, like,
Mm-hmm.
um, but then, my friends dragged me to Star Wars Celebration, which
Oh, yeah.
I liked Star Wars as well. You're allowed to like both, um,
Yes. Yes, people
and
are.
but my friends are huge Star Wars fans. Like
Mhm.
they were Star Wars fans back when they called them Star Woids, like fans of Star Wars, which is a weird term I had
Never
never heard
heard
until
that.
That's a new one to me.
maybe it
Yeah.
was regional. I don't know, but I grew up just south of Indianapolis. Well, I also spent some time in the Gulf of Mexico, but mostly in southern Indianapolis. And Indianapolis is where Star Wars Celebration 1 and 2 were held. So it was
Mhm.
like deeply eye-opening for me between that and Gen Con, how much fun these could be. But I wasn't aware of any sort of Star Wars conventions, and I certainly didn't have any, like, I didn't have the wherewithal to ask my dad to take me to one until I started working on Star Trek. And then I started like, and then I showed up and I was like, what was I thinking? This is awesome. Like, I love these things. It's, because I grew up in Indiana, which is very sports heavy, as a lot of states tend to be.
Mhm.
But, like I was in the
Go
shadow
Midwest.
of the, right. Not much else to do there. But I literally in the shadow of the Indy 500 racetrack and the Pacers and the Colts, and my grandfather was the among other things, he was the head usher at Assembly Hall for Indiana University. So,
Oh.
so like we had season tickets to see IU basketball games and stuff. So, but I was never a sports guy per se. Like I would watch a game and it'd be like, oh, root for the home team, huzzah! But I never tracked stats or anything like that.
Mhm.
But I found quickly, like, oh, like science fiction and fantasy and talking about like nerd lore. That is my going up to a guy in a bar and talking about, how those
Mhm.
cubbies are doing. So I'm glad that I've kind of been sucked into the convention world, because it has been eye opening for me. I think of just that sense of community that I think I always thought was somewhat isolationist in my own exposure to Star Trek, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
I was about to ask if you had ever been to Starbase Indy, but I see from their website that you were a guest at Starbase Indy a couple years ago.
I was, yes. I think when they found out that I was from south of Indy, they reached out and said, "Hey, do you want a trip back for Thanksgiving?" And I said, "Well, now you put it
Nice.
that way." Like, um, but here's the funny part. Here's the crazy part, that I don't know if I've ever told on a podcast, is Starbase Indy,
Exclusive.
the hotel, the hotel that they have held that in for 20 years or whatever, is literally across the street from my dad's dental practice.
Oh,
Like, if
wow.
you look out the
Oh,
window of
that's
my dad's
awesome.
dental practice, you can see the hotel. um and it was just so funny that I went there and I was like, is that my dad's practice? What is going on?
That's cool. That's cool.
I had a
Oh my
root
god.
canal over there.
Ooh. Did your dad do your dental work? I didn't know your father was a dentist.
He is a dentist, and he did do my dental work. But what's kind of funny is he's actually one of the top rated dentists, or what? He just retired. He was, I think, consistently in like the top 10 dentists in Indiana. So he was a very,
Nice.
very good. He was a very good dentist. So whenever in TV shows or movies or cartoons or whatever, they'd always show people like afraid of going to the dentist. It just completely missed me, because I was like, my dad does a good job. Like, I'm not in pain when I go to the
That's
dentist.
good.
He also instilled in me proper tooth care, so I guess I didn't have
Sure.
much
I
in the
would
way of
think.
cavities.
Lucky.
Yeah.
I feel like every time I go to the dentist, they find a cavity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Yeah.
think don't think my teeth were perfect by any means, but um, they better than most. I got to hear the war stories from my dad, oral hygiene
Mhm.
wise.
Mhm. Yeah, I have all the fillings.
Oh yeah, same.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad we could regale the audiences here on Tooth Talk, the #1 Star Trek dentistry podcast.
Star Teeth.
There you go.
Startooth, yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
There was a famous dentist though, I think featured in the Trekkies documentary, if I remember correctly.
I
think he's somewhere in SoCal. Like I think he's in Irvine or something.
I want to say there was like some sort of minor scandal about him and his like divorce.
Oh dear.
But I'd have to ask a friend of the show, Alex Perry. He keeps track of all the people who were on Trekkies.
Okay. I really liked that documentary. I actually, curiously enough, I actually studied that documentary in college. You know, I did a lot of cultural studies. That was kind of one of my foci in college. And we had a whole sort of semester that was on what was called generic transformation, where, you know, once a genre is defined, it can be redefined, you know, both by the media, but also it can be redefined by the cultural context of the people who watch it. And I think Trekkies was sort of a great example of how what Star Trek is kind of evolved and became almost synonymous or impossibly intertwined with the fandom, and like the culture of the fandom in a way wound up circling back and informing the show in a lot of ways. And it's this sort of interesting Ouroboros, Marshall McLuhan sort of situation that I found interesting. And certainly now that I'm making Star Trek, it's come full circle for me as a super fan where my headcanon gets to become canon now.
I love it. Absolutely love it.
I also... I very much enjoy Trekkies and Trekkies 2, but I will say there are certainly some of the interviews in there make me realize how well adjusted I am.
Yeah,
there's the one with the ladies who went to the alien conference and were like talking about the aliens that are actually out here among us and stuff like that. I'm like, that's a little too far, I think.
Right. I want to believe, to quote a different franchise.
Yes.
Agreed.
All right. So, I think some of us who have been heavily involved in Star Trek fandom and news for the past couple years know most of this story, but I bet some of our listeners don't. How exactly did the second season of Prodigy end up on Netflix instead of Paramount Plus?
I mean, it's not a secret that there's been a lot of sort of upheaval and turmoil, I think, in the sort of streaming industry, and all of the networks now have kind of gone through their books after a period of a lot high spending, shall we say, and they were, to give you a sense of how much spending there was. I think before the pandemic, there was an average of about 250 to 300 shows on the air at any one time. And then I think at the peak of streaming, it nudged up to 600 or 650 shows at the same time, which, you know, obviously budgetarily, that's, unless you're expecting a big return on investment, it's a little hard to sustain. So I think once there was a bit of a retraction and a lot of these companies started pulling back on their streaming, they were looking ways to cut costs, and one of those ways is to, rather than making shows and then airing them on your platform and hoping to make up the money with subscribers, you could license it out to other companies, and that becomes profit that is coming into your company rather than selling it to yourself. And that, you know, that latter model is what Sony did. You know, they never opened up a streaming service. They just became what they call in the industry an arms dealer, where they just produce content for other studios or other networks and streamers, and it's like all pure profit. And that's ironically closer to the old school studio network model that existed until streaming came along. And so I think ultimately when Paramount wanted to try to improve costs, they looked at their whole slate. I think they have since pulled off a number of shows, maybe 40 or 50, and licensed them out or sought to license them out to other networks that then they could, co-finance or co-produce future seasons if it does well. And ultimately, that's kind of what happened with our show. There was a point where there was 6 Star Trek shows on the air, and I think Star Trek is not a cheap show to produce, as you can imagine. And so they decided to explore all options of how to keep the show going, because I should point out that CBS Studios in particular loves our show and was absolutely championing it, and
That's good to know.
even though animation as such hasn't exactly been thriving on Paramount Plus, they knew that there were other audiences out there and places where it could thrive. And at the top of our list was Netflix, specifically because they already have an inbuilt like YA animation audience that they have nurtured and cultured over the last 10 years. And that's where we got shows like The Dragon Prince and Troll Hunters, which is a show that myself and the Hagemans worked on, and the Tales of Arcadia trilogy. It's why Avatar, The Last Airbender, has exploded over there and then resulted in, creating this, Avatar Studios and multiple spin-offs and movies and live action reinterpretations. It is a place where the people at our target audience, which is teenagers, but also some people that are younger and a lot of people that are older can all enjoy these shows together. And Netflix has a very large reach. I believe it's still number 1. So that was where we were hoping to wind up. And thankfully, once we took it out on the market, they were one of the very early people to say officially say yes, we want to buy it. So I'm very happy that we wound up at Netflix. Especially in these sort of unusual times, it is sort of a safe harbor, and it has the opportunity to continue there. So I'm excited, and I'm so happy that it was received so well. And every day I'm seeing posts from people that I think because 20 episodes came out at once, everybody enjoyed it at their own pace. So, there wasn't necessarily I'm going to binge all 10 episodes in one day, shoot to the top chart, but it's been a slow crescendo and a steady increase of total minutes that I think has given us a tremendous reach in a way that I none of us dreamed was possible, but it's doing very well.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, I think I know I've definitely heard way more discussion and, well, overall love for the show with season 2 than I ever heard with season 1.
Yeah, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, I will say that Star Trek, a lot of these shows, they have a sort of a season 1 where it's kind of finding its feet and fighting its audience, and then season 2, it escalates, and that happened with pretty much every other Star Trek show, where they had the season 1 did okay. And then season 2 came out, and there's a 500% increase in viewership. That happened with Lower Decks. It happened with a number of other shows, and so we were waiting for that opportunity when all of this craziness happened. But I think we still had the faith that once season 2 came out, it would have all of those people who had reluctantly checked it out and then enjoyed season 1, it would have collected all those fans so they could all watch in one place, and then evangelize to people who maybe had written it off as just a cartoon or what have you, which is I'm no stranger to that as somebody who's worked a lot in animation. I think there's a lot of people that are still coming around to animation as a medium rather than a genre. And but I think that we've seen the sort of explosion of YA as a show, as sort of a gateway to a lot of different storytelling that could be enjoyed by young, old, male and female, and everybody in between. And so I think that we're starting to finally creep into that larger audience base, which I'm very happy for.
Yeah. We're happy to see it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had conversations with quite a few people where they've said, "Oh, well, I haven't watched that because it's a kids show." I'm like, "Oh, you really need to actually watch it and give it a shot because, well, it is a kids show. It is also 100% Star Trek."
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the kids shows that we wanted to emulate were like Batman the animated series, where
Heck yeah.
if you enjoy Batman, like it's hard to tell a fan that that's a cartoon, that's for kids. I think maybe it has the benefit that had the benefit of the doubt of starting as a comic book, so it's easier for people to wrap their heads around it. And in a way, back when Batman was first being produced as live action, they had dealt with some of that skepticism. A friend and mentor of mine is Michael Uslan, who is one of the producers of the Batman movies, and he talked about how when he was trying to make the Michael Keaton 1989 Batman, when he couldn't find anybody who was interested. He spent like 10 years knocking on people's doors when he got the rights, because they were like, "Oh, that's the guy from the Funny Papers." Like, no thanks. Like, and it wasn't until it came out and the proof of concept was there that it kind of exploded into the zeitgeist. So, that's just the nature of we talked about Marshall McLuhan. The medium is the message sometimes, and I think people have certain expectations, and for me, I enjoy nothing more than defying those expectations and expanding people's palette a little bit.
What's
wild about that is that the Superman movies would have already been out by that point.
Oh, yeah.
And done incredibly well.
Yes, but I think those were still considered a little campy, and the pitch specifically for Batman is like, no, this is a dark and gritty, serious Batman, and they're like, yeah, no. I saw the Superman movies. He throws foil out of his belt at somebody and wraps him up. He flies around the Earth backwards and somehow time travels. What a novel concept!
How that worked.
I imagine the same way that a Klingon bird of prey traveling around the sun would also time travel.
Yeah. Same physics. Makes perfect sense to me. Batman is the perfect superhero for the 80s in that way that Batman does not have superpowers. He just has money. And
yeah,
so
he's extremely wealthy, and he's tired of those dang laws and regulations getting in the way.
The absolute champion of Reaganomics.
Oh dear, I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right.
Hope I didn't ruin it for you.
No, it's just fun. Now it's just funny to me.
No, yeah, it's actually your comments about the larger audience, Lisa, one of the other questions I had listed here, we discussed, and I know I've heard from other people that they felt like season 2 was a little more grown up and it was a little more Trek. Not that the first season wasn't Trek, but I think there was more of a, like, this is what Trek is. And then season 2, you get in and there's all this wonderful lore and all these inside jokes and all of that kind of thing. So did you intend to have that kind of jump when you were planning things out, or was that something you saw audience reaction and said, oh, we can get a little more into the weeds with this?
I mean, we always, one of the mandates of the show was to be an on-ramp for young and new audiences to Star Trek. And so it was very much by design and intent to start in a place that is so far removed from Star Trek that you can just kind of ease into what is the Federation and how does it distinguish from other star-based properties. And then you can get into the fun nitty gritty of like, how do transporters work? What are phasers? What's the prime directive? What's first contact? And then once you kind of establish all of those baseline protocols, then you can start building on that tower. And then it's a little bit like a tower to Babylon, but a tower to Star Trek, I guess, where all these foundational principles. Yeah. Sorry,
Just
what did I say? Babylon?
Oh, yeah. I was making a bad joke. I was Journey to Babel.
Oh, no. Yeah, I get it now. Yes, the Tower of...
well, no, It is the Tower of Babel also.
The Tower of Babel.
It is.
Yeah, Babel.
But I wasn't correcting you. I'm sorry.
I was mixing up the Gardens of Babylon and the Tower of Babel.
Those were very tall as well, so it's fine.
Yes. But we always wanted for our audience to grow up with our show. Like that was very interesting to us, and we liked the idea that we would start with very simple ideas, and we could, as the years wore on, we could watch our characters grow up, and we can watch the stories sort of blossom and fully embrace, what is Star Trek. And if the first season was the journey to Star Trek, and perhaps experiencing a little bit of the ideals of Star Trek, coming into conflict with the practice and the moral dilemmas of Star Trek, then I think season 2 is, well, you got what you wished for, monkey's paw curl. You're now stuck in Star Trek world, and it's a lot more complicated and multifaceted and nuanced than I think you initially thought. And so we wanted to explore that transition. One thing that kind of helped us sell the idea to the network was when we described it as the transition that we all go through, where there's some major threshold, like going when you first enter middle school or high school or college. You might have been the big fish in the little pond before, but now you're in the greater galaxy, so to speak. And you're not necessarily as special as you thought you once were when you were the valedictorian in a class of 400. Now you're up against 8 billion people. Can you still make a difference? And I think that was very interesting to us, and we felt, I think, empowered to dive fully into the Star Trek lore and I guess expectations of what classic Star Trek was, because we had earned it in a way. We had handheld the audience to the point where we can now go into the just classic Trek. We're just doing Star Trek now, and if they have to do a little running to catch up along the way, that's great, because our characters are doing that too, and it's a chance for them to kind of try to jump onto that moving train of the wide, wild world that is the Star Trek franchise. And thankfully, people seem to have gone along for the ride with us, so I'm glad for that.
Yeah, it was well ramped, I guess we'll say.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
It is one heck of a ride.
Yeah, and I think the Hagemans have also said they wanted it to be very much at the adult table, which I think we always wanted to be, but we knew that we'd have to get there incrementally. But season 2 was our chances to say, like, hey, we know what we're doing. Like we can write Star Trek stories too. And beyond just celebrating what already exists, I think we love the challenge of adding to the Star Trek canon in a way that we thought was interesting, both exploring things like the Vaunakot, which obviously we had introduced in season 1 as like sort of our major new species, but they were still sort of a tabula rasa in a lot of ways, because we had not seen the culture as it exists now. We had just sort of alluded to it or seen it through the eyes and memories of characters talking about it. And so we got to obviously deep dive on what Vaunakot culture was like, and then also introduce other species like the loom, which was our attempt to come up with a species that was just as frightening and as huge of a seemingly insurmountable challenge as the Borg were when I remember first encountering them in like Q-Who or what have you, where it seemed like the Federation was so outmatched and ungunned by this thing, this entity that seemed truly unknowable and unstoppable. I think we were like, what would the Borg be afraid of? And that was where we started to sort of explore extraplanar or extra dimensional creatures that that seem to operate on a different sort of almost a different level of physics than we do, that's pretty scary for a scientist, I think, but it's also exciting in a way. And then on top of that, tackling the issue of time travel was kind of its own challenge, because in Star Trek, famously, if you ask about the rules of Star Trek, at least until our show, it was like, what are the rules of Star Trek? Well, it depends on what episode you're watching when it comes to time travel. And so we realized that we had an opportunity to try to unify at least some of those ideas, and that had been alluded to here or there, especially with organizations like the Traveler or the Q or or the time agents of the Federation time ships that we've seen, where they always seem to be operating on a level that is even advanced past the 24th century understanding of time, space, and physics. But there is sort of an eternal logic that they kind of hint at, that we're able to kind of thread all together with the addition of Wesley Crusher and the Travelers as an organization, and it was a fun sandbox to play in that I think we could have only played in with, because we had people that had watched all of Star Trek and read it like a book and were wondering about this stuff for 30 years. So when we brought it in, it already had sort of like a coherence that I think would have been hard if we were starting from scratch.
Yeah. That is an advantage of modern Trek, that there's fans producing it. So.
Yeah. The real challenge, I think, was writing all of that in a way that even if you didn't know the background or the backstory, or even if you didn't totally understand all of it, it would still play as a story. And I think in some ways, having, young people who wouldn't be experts in temporal mechanics was actually a godsend, because, otherwise every scene would just be like a dense wall of technobabble that even if everything we were saying was correct, I don't know if audiences at home would know or care what the hell we were talking about. But we at least were able to create we knew that there was an internal logic, and we could allude to it as much as we could in a simplified way that people would at least understand. Oh, like we have to get the protostar back to its place in the past of the time of the prime timeline in order for history to be resolved. And because of the unique situation involving the wormhole and temporal shielding, it has forced us into a new phenomenon that has not necessarily been seen in Star Trek yet, where it's wedged open a time loop that has not been closed yet for 20 to 40 episodes, depending on how you count it. And it was I spent a lot of sleepless nights pondering it and thinking all of it out, and having my conspiracy corkboard of just like, I think this works. But we wrote it in such a way that you don't necessarily need to know every intricacy to understand the emotional reasons for why they're doing the things, which is, I think, is how Star Trek has always operated. I think Star Trek always operates on like 6 different levels. Like there's the really crunchy scientific understanding of things. And then but then there's also the emotional understanding of like, we have to get Geordi back on the ship because he's been infected by an alien virus. Like you don't need to know necessarily how the retrovirus is turning him into another creature. But if you want to know that stuff, there's enough there in the episodes that you can at least fill in the blanks, if not outright understand the scientific principles behind it. And so knowing that, and knowing that Star Trek had always been cheeky that way, perhaps we were a little hubristic about it, but we knew that we could probably fly the plane.
So you mentioned the Loom, who were honestly legitimately scary.
Yeah.
I couldn't help noticing in watching it some similarities between the Loom and a series of Star Trek novels from a couple years ago, the Coda trilogy, which sort of tied up the post-series shows with some alien creatures that were eating alternate timelines. I'm just curious, was there any deliberate reference to that, or was that just a happy coincidence?
I've had this conversation with David Mack, actually, who was
was
one of the authors of Coda.
Yeah.
Which, he's a friend and colleague because he worked on season 1 with us.
Right.
And it was just funny because it actually did not come up in the room, but we both talked about it. It's like, honestly, it's in a way is reassuring that, if we're given the same sandbox and the same sort of general concepts or challenges, that we kind of arrived at the same answer. It's a little bit like almost like a mathematical proof that's been verified that, I guess we got it right then, But I believe in a lot of the inspiration, I think, came from the same foundations, the same sources. In the Coda books, which I had honestly, I think when they were coming out, we were busy writing the show, so like I didn't have time to read them. But I think in the Coda books, they're the Davidians or something like that from Times Arrow, which is ironic because Times Arrow was a huge inspiration for Star Trek Season 2. And so I think, I've gone on record saying that Times Arrow is my favorite episode of Star Trek. I know it's sort of a unusual one. It's easier to say like The Stranger or Inner Light or whatever, but I like it because it has everything. It has an insane time loop, Data's head, 500 years old, time travel back to 19th century San Francisco, Mark Twain on the Enterprise. It's great. It has everything. And I think that at least subconsciously, the idea of aliens that are attracted to and consume paradox energy was probably in the back of my mind. And we combined that with looking at the travelers, obviously, who are not one singular species, but seem to conscript other people who have achieved ascended to a certain level of higher sentience that allows them to manipulate time. And that led us to arrive at the conclusion that wouldn't it be interesting if there was a trans-dimensional species that was not enlightened the same way that the travelers are, but had evolved naturally those same abilities to slow or stop time and consume timelines and manipulate them. And wouldn't that be a scary, formidable foe of somebody who kind of seems to operate on a different level of quantum physics than even our 24th century folks understand? The anti-traveler, if you will. And so that's kind of how we arrived at that. And obviously, we're huge fans of all science fiction, and there's other examples of, I think TV Tropes has a whole page of similar ideas called clockroaches.
Good
but
name.
there's I love that. TV Tropes is great for that. But the
TV
Langoliers was mentioned. The Reavers from Doctor Who. Like they all kind of play with that in that realm of yesterday or tomorrow being devoured by monsters. But we kind of wanted to put our own spin on that, especially with a whole season dedicated to time travel. We didn't want it to just be Essentia, because I feel like there's two categories or two buckets that I tend to put so-called Star Trek villains into in my head. One of them is the sort of the mad Captain Ahab type, who feels like he's been deeply wronged to the point and seeks revenge to the point of obsession. And that's your Khans or your Sorens or whatever. But then the other one is that sort of existential threat, like the Borg or Species 8472, and that we wanted to have an example of the latter for our show.
Oh, you did. Definitely.
It is funny though, because we talked about a little bit of, how do we make them scary, and we realized we knew that the other shows like Strange New Worlds was already doing the kind of the xenomorph kind of element with the Gorn and that sort of thing, and we knew we would be somewhat limited of what we were allowed to do for a show that was ostensibly rated TVY7.
Yeah.
But what's funny is there's this sort of in joke with a lot of animation folks that sometimes when you get a note from Standards and Practices saying you can't do that, you come up with something that's more inventive and inadvertently makes it 1,000 times worse. A great example of that was in the old Spider-Man the Animated Series. There was a vampire character that I think what's his name? Morbius.
Morbius.
Yeah, Morbius, and in the cartoon, S&P told them you can't have him biting people and drinking their blood, because that's imitatable behavior. And so they thought about it, and they came back and said, what if he just had like tentacle suckers on his hands that would remove the plasma from your body? And they said, that's fine. And now you can find images of this guy just shoving his tentacle hand at you. And it's so much scarier than a vampire ever was. But that's just the nature of TV. Sometimes that sort of cosmic horror that's just the unfathomable and unknowable is sometimes scarier than the monster who's simply going to eat you.
Mm-hmm. So I know we're covering some ground that's already been covered before, so forgive if you're sick of answering these questions, but
No, I'm happy to.
we appreciate that. Were there any Trek characters you wanted to use and couldn't? And was it, and why? Was it because they were being held out for the shows or couldn't find them or whatever?
I think that there was very rarely has there been an occasion where we couldn't use a character. The only time that it came up was actually the inverse, which was we wanted to, like, we were already using Wesley Crusher for our series, and then as season 2 was being written, they started to integrate the supervisors, and then they started to, I think as anybody who's seen Assignment Earth is and paid attention, the supervisors were reporting to a mysterious time-traveling alien race that was left unnamed. And Picard made the connection of like, oh, what if it was the Travelers? And then I think originally in the first draft that we had seen of episode 9 or 10 or whatever that cameo appears, it was just like an old woman who steps out of a portal and says, come join the Travelers. And I think they realized it just didn't have the same punch, and they said, hey, we know what you're doing with Wesley. He is kind of like, besides the Traveler played by Eric Mignone, is there a world where we could use Wesley? And so we were, once they kind of solidified that they wanted to lock in that they were with the Travelers and they wanted to use Wesley, we're like, all right, let's have some conversations about this. So we hopped on some calls with Akiva Goldsman and then eventually Terry Metalis, just to try to determine, okay, what is this organization? How do they relate exactly? Where is Wesley's place in it? And from those talks, I wound up creating a document that was about 8 pages long that
Nice.
detailed everything that we knew about the supervisors, everything we knew about the Travelers from TOS and TNG, and as they appear in our shows, and then basically a thesis essay of like, here's what I think works, here's how we could establish it. And thankfully, Akiva and the Hagemans read it and like, yeah, this is great, let's do that. So, and then Akiva was generous enough that he wrote Wesley's speech and basically gave it to us and said, do whatever you need to it. I'm not precious about any of it. And so I wound up rewriting a lot of his speech there, which I think at first people were unsure what he was talking about, and partially I think that was just the surprise of him just kind of showing up and vanishing.
Oh yeah.
And I think a lot of that came from them wanting more, because he wasn't necessarily set up in Picard season 2. And then now that season 2 of Prodigy is out, they're like, wait a second, everything he's saying in Prodigy is lining up with what he said in that speech. And it's like, yeah, because I wrote both. So at STLV this year, I was on a couple of panels, one of which was a Prodigy panel, and I kind of revealed, or at least confirmed, that something that some fans had noticed, that even in Wesley's speech, he's saying, he says things like, a star is born, but a ship is lost. And that's an allusion to the end of season 1 of Prodigy, which I think had not come out yet at that time. And then a new species thrives, but a civilization falls, which is the Loom and the fall of Solum. And it was like we were kind of throwing a Hail Mary to ourselves 2 years in the past.
Yeah.
And so it wound up working out nicely. And then obviously, as season 3 was being written, which was kind of being overseen by a separate writer's room with Terry, it became very obvious that Beverly and Jack especially were going to be a big part of that. And we had always planned for Wesley to, his sort of journey in Prodigy was almost like, how a captain can be married to the sea. Well, he was sort of married to the cosmos, and in a way, his kind of mono vision of just protecting those that he loves from his former life. In doing that, he forgot how to live himself, and and his journey. We wanted him to kind of reconnect with that former life and realize there could be a balance of both by literally reconnecting with his family. So when they introduced the Jack of it all, we were like, all right, I think there's to quote Rock Chalk, a problemtunity here, where I think because season 3 will have come out by that time, we can, in that reunion, we could be like a proper family reunion, sans Picard, obviously. But we could have all of them meet together, and it wound up being a really beautiful moment. And it was funny because because that was like the last shots of the last episode of the season, we didn't have the money to build like a Jack rig or anything like that. And we also didn't want to necessarily fuel the how old is Jack exactly questions.
You still did, but that's not your own fault.
But I think we did it quite well, because you just hear him. You hear Jack speak a full sentence. He doesn't say goo goo gaga. And if according to the timeline, he has to be at least 5. So we got a 5-year-old to record the line. And I think it's, in a way, it's more beautiful to stay on Wesley's face as he kind of sees what he's been missing. Maybe he saw it in his timeline searches or whatever, but to be in the moment, to be literally present for a time traveler is a profound experience. And so that was actually exciting and fun for us, I think. And there are more surprises, shall we say, coming up in other Star Trek that I think people will be excited about. I think the only characters I can think of that didn't I think we reached out to but couldn't, in season 1, I think we reached out to a lot of people for the holodeck episode that I wrote, Kobayashi, and some people just weren't available for one reason or another. I think at one point we had Worf in there, and I think Deanna Troi was unavailable. But in season 2, I think there was one moment that we thought might be a fun cameo that eventually became Dr. Aaron doing the video of Temporal Mechanics 101, and it wound up making more sense, but we were like, there was a brief moment where we were like, well, could it be just like a fun cameo for like a classic Star Trek engineer to be there? So I think we reached out to LeVar Burton and Cole Meany, both of whom were like, we're only going to be on the show if it's like a proper like role. We're not going to record this goofy.
I can understand that.
Especially Cole Meany. He was just like, no. But it's fine. Like I actually take that as a challenge for season 3, to be honest. Like, all right.
So O'Brien main cast season 3. Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, fingers crossed. Yeah. That's at this point, I don't think that's up to me.
On the note, you were talking about how you coordinated with Picard for the Wesley cameo. On a related note, did you ever consider using Issa Briones' character Corey in season 2 of Prodigy?
We thought about it, but our show was so packed to the gills with with characters. I don't think any of us were super keen on throwing in another character we would have to explain who they were and where they came from. I think we barely got away with catching folks up to speed with Wesley Crusher as sort of like a surprise reveal. We were able to get it out of the way just because, we had Rock be a fangirl, and obviously she could just say, oh my God, Wesley Crusher from TNG. And then we could have, and then obviously we saw in Nemesis that Kate Mulgrew's Janeway, Vice Admiral Janeway, had developed a personal relationship with the TNG folks. You know, she doesn't say, I believe in the show, she doesn't say like, hello, Captain Picard. She says, hello, Jean-Luc, how are you? Like, which implies a very familiar kind of, you know, relationship that they have established in the years hence. So we kind of were able to play into that a little bit. You know, I think that if we revisit the Travelers, I would be totally open to seeing a little bit more of how Wesley has begun to rebuild them. You know, after they fled. Which, by the way, this is sort of I know your show is no stranger to diversions and digressions, but
Oh God, no.
I was very proud that we were able to get back Eric Mignone, who had
Yeah,
not
that's awesome.
So wonderful.
he had actually retired from acting pretty much after those roles in TNG, even though he was like up for the role of Data. You know, he had those 3 roles and then he retired and became a lawyer. And I think he had done like 1 or 2 conventions, but otherwise had kind of, you know, gone off to live his life as he's allowed to.
Yeah.
And then
That's
and
so
then suddenly,
random. I didn't know he was a lawyer.
yeah, I mean, he a successful one too. And
Sure,
so then
I'm sure.
then we're then suddenly, you know, 30 years later, he's getting like frantic emails and texts from some maniacs that want to talk to him about something important that we can't talk about until he signs an NDA. And he's like, who are you? But he was very gracious. Like once, like I think we literally had to leave phone like our casting group had to leave phone call messages on his law firm's answering machine. And he was very gracious. And as soon as he heard what was going on, he was very excited, because I think, you know, I think he cherishes though that he was able to be part of TNG, but it wound up not being a huge part of the grand scope of his life. But when we were like, we want to bring him back, at first he was a little reticent, because he was like, you know, I'm like much older than I was back then. I don't even know if I could do the voice anymore. So I prepared a series of clips for him and played like all the key clips from the 3 episodes he appeared in. And we were able to calibrate in the booth until he was able to get the intonation just right.
Nice.
And you can,
Cool.
and I it's my favorite sort of like subtle, like we put it right at bed level, which is like just barely outside of hearing range, as you're entering the Traveler transdimensional time ziggurat, TM, that you can hear, you can hear his lines, some of which are echoes of things he said in TNG, and some of them are new ones from his conversation with Wesley in the moments before they had to flee because the Loom were too great of a threat for them to try to salvage the Prime Universe. It was just like this fun thing that I felt like something you'd see almost in a video game or something. I was inspired to do it because I remember in those early days of Lost, I don't know if you remember the first season of Lost especially, they did a lot with sound design.
Oh, yeah.
Where, you know, every time the smoke monster would appear, there'd be like these whispers, and people were obsessed with it, and were like going in and like dissecting the waveform to try to see what the whispers were saying. And then I think eventually the show caught on and started putting in secret messages in the whispers. I wanted to do something like that, and so that's why and I was like, if we're bringing the Traveler back, let's get Eric Mignone. There's no reason not to.
Yeah.
And he was great. I thought he did a great job. Sorry,
That's
what
really
was the
cool.
question?
No, you answered the question. The
Yeah,
question
you did
had
answer the
been-
question.
The
Okay.
question was whether you had considered bringing Issa Briones in. So you answered that
Right.
question. So you're good.
Yeah, okay.
Were there any story elements that you that you planned or wanted to do in season 2 that you didn't get a chance to?
I think in the very early days of the season, you know, if time was going to be sort of coming unraveled, so to speak, we wanted to explore like all possibilities before we locked in on what was right for our story. And so there's this period in the early days of breaking any season that they call the blue sky period, where it's like there's not necessarily wrong answers, and like let's just explore anything that could be possible. And one possibility that was thrown out at one point, I think by Kevin, was like, what if it was like just a purely like time travel season, and every episode was revisiting some new or some classic event in Star Trek history, and our heroes were kind of thrown into that, and then it started to feel a little too Doctor Who, but it was a fun idea at the time, just to kind of like play with for a day or two of like, what would that really look like? Would they help rescue the whales that would eventually become Jillian's grandparents? Like what would they help disable Khan's ship? Like, and very quickly we realized though that that would be insanely expensive even for animation to have brand new sets and characters for every episode. So it was just, yeah. There were other small things too. I think when we were kind of exploring, well, how can we explore the multiverse and that sort of thing? What eventually became Cracked Mirror, we had looked at a couple of different ways that could play out. I think Cracked Mirror had a couple of extra layers that were on it at one point, where I think the last layer, the final boss layer, after they escaped the mirror universe, was the universe where the Borg won. That presumably where, in parallels, there's that classic really thing that's haunted so many Trekkies' nightmares of
we can't go back.
I'm not going back. I can't. He blows up like, oh my God, Riker, no. And so I was like, why don't we visit that world and see what happened with the Intrepid class that was sent off into the Delta Quadrant, maybe to fight the Borg. And it would have been a completely assimilated Voyager, where the doors open and for all intents and purposes it just looks like you're on the hallway of a Borg cube, and then you realize that it's completely assimilated Voyager, and then there's just like a assimilated Janeway after them, and they have to fight their way to the bridge with the help of Mirror Janeway. It was going to be like a real sort of time hoppy, weird, crazy thing. But if we had a 44-minute episode, maybe we could have made that work, but it was just, alas, we had to cut it for time. And then I think I mentioned this in a Screen Rant interview, but we also briefly entertained the idea of exploring the Kelvinverse.
Okay.
And maybe we realized it'd probably be expensive to create a Kelvinverse enterprise and bring back the whole crew, but maybe there was some incident where they could pull Kelvinverse Spock or Kirk. I think we were playing with the idea of like, how could we get Kirk into our show? And we're like, what if it was the Kelvinverse Kirk? That would be wild. And maybe having him be in a 2-part episode or something, trying to resolve it. But it felt like when we were really digging in, it felt like too big of a idea, I think, to just waste on a 2-parter that would have probably had very little bearing on the rest of our season. And also, as you can imagine, actually bringing it's one thing to use ships from the movies. It's another thing to bring in actors from the movies. It's
Chris Pine is not cheap.
Right. You never know. Sometimes they might do it just as a lark, but I think it was more just the Paramount Pictures of it all. They were like, please don't.
Yeah.
It's all under one roof now. You could.
No, we could.
I know, it's still, there's still money. I know.
We are at the end of the day, we are an animated show that costs much less than a live action show to produce, but that also means we don't have the budget of a live action show. But a part of me like perversely wanted to fulfill the promise of that Enterprise episode that was supposed to bring Kirk back. I was like, we can do it somehow. We'll do it.
Season 3.
Yeah. I think we even also explored somehow bringing Kirk back, like William Shatner Kirk, but I think that also was just would have proven too difficult and or expensive.
I guarantee he wouldn't have done it for free.
No.
I was slightly disappointed that we never got to see Captain Tuvix.
Yes.
Yes, but it would have been the world's most expensive sight gag. I'll put it that way. $50,000 for 2 seconds of hello.
Yeah.
At least mentioning him, I got to write my favorite joke, I think, of the whole series so far, which is the I was really starting to like his Vulcan Talaxian fusion cuisine.
Nice. Nice. All right. Well, we like to try to talk about things that aren't just Trek here, in more than just tangents. So, one thing I like to know about people, what's your favorite book, and what book's been most influential in your life?
Oh gosh. I mean, if I'm being really honest, I would say probably.
You don't have to. You can lie.
You can lie.
No, I like being honest. I would probably say the most influential was probably The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, because
Nice.
growing
All
up
right.
when I was a kid, I was not an avid reader when I was really young. The only books that my parents could get me to read were Goosebumps books.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, there's nothing wrong with that, but I will be the first to admit they're not the best written books out there. But I think I was kind of addicted to that kind of, because I knew Star Trek was episode of the week, and it was like, ooh, horror anthology type stuff. Like I
I
loved
read so many of those as a kid.
Yeah, I loved Twilight Zone. I loved Star Trek. I loved Tales from the Dark Side. I loved everything that was just like this, big twist at the end kind of stuff. And they were funny and scary and spooky and weird. But I would not read anything else. My parents tried to get me to read Hardy Boys books, and I read like 3 pages of one, and it was the most boring thing I'd ever read in my life. And I was like, no, Goosebumps only. But I remember one time, I was very young at this time, maybe like 5 or 6 or something. And I remember one time I was in the car, and my dad this is me showing my age, he would rent books on tape from the library. And,
Yes.
and he had a book on tape that was like a full audio production cast of The Hobbit. And he just,
nice.
thinking back, I wonder if he did it on purpose. Like, because like, why would my dad be listening to The Hobbit? Because I knew he'd already read it. But I was listening to it, and I was like, what is this? What are dwarves? Why are they in a river raft adventuring barrels? Smaug? A dragon? And I proceeded to ask my dad if I could have the tapes and just and listen to the rest of it. And he was like, yeah, sure. And I literally like got my boombox again, 90s, and put the tape in. I proceeded to listen to the rest of the book for the rest of that day. And then I was like, Dad, that was amazing. What else is there? And he was like, well, there's this trilogy of books that are like a sequel. And I was like, ooh. And then me and all my friends in the playground consumed the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Silmarillion and everything, and it opened up this whole other avenue.
You read the Silmarillion when you were 6?
No, well, no. Silmarillion was last. We read the.
It's always yes, yeah.
And even the Silmarillion, I think I read a couple years after, but the Lord of the Rings books, my friends, I don't think we ever even thought of it in terms of like a book club or anything like that, but it just became, it was like, it was Indiana, the internet wasn't very great, and there was nothing to do besides rent movies from Blockbuster and I guess read. And so we would hang on the playground and just talk about like, what chapter are you on in Lord of the Rings?
Nice.
Because we were that cool.
Yeah.
And then it kind of I always say like I liked them before they were cool, okay? And then that segued into the Dune series, and I wound up. I remember in 7th and 8th grade, reading. My dad, I was like, that was so cool. I was like, well, you like Star Trek, right? What I was like, is there anything else? Is there any like science fiction-y like? And he was like, why don't you check out Dune? And so like all my friends read Dune together, and then we read all the way up through whatever the last one was that Frank Herbert wrote, Chapter House Dune, the 5th or 6th one. Wait, they get very weird, but I love them. I mean, we were just so enthralled with it. Again, I liked Dune before it was cool, and then we all rented the Dune movie from David Lynch because that's all there was at the time. which I think we all perversely loved just because, we didn't have taste. I don't know.
I have
I think I still
tried
kind
to
of
watch
like it.
that movie like 3 times. I can't get past the fact that it uses internal monologue as a plot device. It just
Yeah. And I think
Ugh.
actually that was added or insisted upon being added by the studio to make it. They're like, we
Ooh.
don't think the audience will know what's happening, so
Narration.
you have to add narration. And so that's what he did. And that's why David Lynch took his name off it. It's
Right.
an Alan P. Smithy film because he felt like it just wasn't what he wanted it to be, which is ethereal and surrealistic and weird. It is funny in retrospect. Like, that was the first David Lynch movie I saw, and then I remember after the fact I went, I've especially high school and college, I watched his other films, and I was like, why does the weird little alien baby from Eraserhead look so familiar? I'm like, oh my god, it's a guild navigator. And yeah, I mean, and both of those were kind of my gateway drugs into fantasy and science fiction. And since then, I've read Heinlein and Ursula K. Le Guin and Asimov and all the greats. But those were the first. And maybe it's not unique. It's like saying the Beatles are a great band, but those were definitely influential on my life.
Yeah.
You can never go wrong saying the Lord of the Rings and Dune are good books. I mean,
Yeah. But
Yeah.
to me, they felt like a secret almost. Like, oh my god, have you heard of these?
I give you all sorts of credit for reading Lord of the Rings at that age. I read that in my 20s in the midst of a history degree, and I found some of the stuff I was reading for class to be less confusing. I'm like, oh, there's so much to this.
It's a great point, though, because I think, and Kate Mulgrew has talked about this a little bit, and I've talked about it too, with Star Trek or any fiction or fantasy or with something with a lot of world building. In a strange way, I think young minds can be more absorbent to it.
Yes.
To where a lot of those nuance that adults tend to kind of obsess about, for a kid, it's all novel to them. And so they just absorb all of it as just a matter of fact rather than expecting some concrete explanation to materialize. And so I think for me, I wasn't asking what an orc was all along the way. Like, what is their society like? I was just like, oh yeah, that's what orcs do, I guess. And I wasn't asking like who I mean, I kind of was like who's Galadriel was and what were these sort of like tiers of the Elandril or whatever. But it was but it was just sort of like, okay, yeah, he got a magic potion that wards off spiders. Take that, Shelob. It was not. It was, and I think that's why, especially in Star Trek and Star Trek Prodigy, we weren't afraid to go to some of those more complicated places because, like, I was probably 6 or 7 when I first watched Time's Arrow, and I stayed up late under the covers thinking about, so wait, Data's head was 500 years old and they just put it back on his body, so how old is Data actually? And it really threw me for a loop. It was like, how many times does that time loop play out? So does that mean his head's actually 1,500 years old, or it's 1,000 years old, or it's infinite years old? That's the stuff I thought about. But I wanted to make that. I wanted other kids to feel that way. Like, sometimes it's cool to ask a question that's intriguing and not have it all be so resolved so cleanly that you don't wonder about it. And that's the sort of stuff I like to write and read and watch.
It's like learning a language.
Yeah,
Your
exactly.
brain soaks it up better. I love it.
Similar to Chrissie's question, did you have a favorite video game as a kid, or do you have one now?
Gosh, I did have some favorite video games growing up. Again, showing my age, I was very much I was there I played Atari and Nintendo, and then arcades were these sort of magical palaces where you just get a fistful of quarters and just be transported to any number of worlds. I really, again, showing my Star Trek credentials, I did really love Turtles in Time. Teenage Ninja Turtles 4, where they time
Yes.
each level as a different time period.
Yep.
Bury my shell at Wounded Knee. And that was that was my favorite. I really loved that one. And then I think when the was it SNES? It must have been Super Mario RPG. Did you ever play that game?
Mm-hmm.
So
yes. In fact,
I didn't.
I've just been working on the Switch redo.
Yeah,
I heard
they
it's
just
good.
remastered it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So Super Mario RPG, I did not have a PlayStation growing up the way that it's always funny. Like you ask people like, did you love Final Fantasy? And I was like, no, I was a Nintendo household.
Yep.
I think a couple of them were ported over, but like not Final Fantasy VII,
No.
which is a lot of people's favorite. But Super Mario RPG, like I knew the Mario lore, and that was the first time I got to play like a proper RPG, and that really blew my mind, I think, and all the in-depth secrets and stuff that they managed to work in there and tell like a full story, because previous to that it was just a side scroller, and you'd have the princess in another castle, and that was like all the lore you would get, and I think that was a chance to actually tell a story. Similarly, I really loved of the JRPGs that did manage to make it into my household. Chrono Trigger was a big deal in my household. I actually have right here this it's a mock-up of a scene from Chrono Trigger. It's like a 3D thing that I have in my office that I always it just is a I don't know, trying to remind myself of like those little moments of magic that you can find, in the most unexpected places. And then, as I kind of got older, oh, you know what? I also really like the Star Wars Super Nintendo game. Did you ever play that one? I think it was called Super Star Wars or something like that.
No, I don't think I ever did.
It was not. The graphics were good. It was not well made, but in a way that was like exciting because, it was like and to put it in, it was almost like a roguelike, if you're familiar, where it's so hard that just dying and starting over is part of the gameplay. But that was a lot of fun. And then well into college, I remember LAN parties were a big deal when I was growing up.
Oh yeah,
early aughts. Yep.
Yeah,
I miss LAN parties.
I actually my friends and I created a team. There's an old video game called Tribes 2.
Oh yeah.
that, and we played every night in preparation for like a professional tournament, and then but then as we were prepping for that, Counter-Strike came out. And then everybody was playing Counter-Strike, and there was nobody who was playing Tribes 2 anymore. So they had to assemble a team for us to play in the tournament, and then we just whomped them completely. and then they were like, "All right, here's your your trophy or whatever." And then in college, this is gonna sound like a humble brag, but it's just true. I became like one of the world's best Battlefield 1942 players, inexplicably.
Ooh.
Okay.
Like,
Cool.
because it was a game, it was, again, for those uninitiated, the Battlefield games are just like war simulators and your first-person shooter kind of a thing, but it was like a team sport, like a capture the flag type thing. And I got in Battlefield 1942, and then in college, I had my first access to Ethernet, so high-speed internet, so I could play against other people. And so as my wind down after class every night, I would just boot it up and play it. And I got so good that I could like pinpoint like the exact pixel I needed to click in order to pop someone's head from across the map. And I was consistently the number one player at every single map that I was on, and was like world ranked. And then
Nice.
And then college got too busy for me, and then I lost all of those skills immediately.
That will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But those are all some fun games. I do love the Fallout universe. That's it's my sweet spot of that sort of post-ironic, post-apocalyptic weirdness. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Uncharted games are very much the Indiana Jones movies I wish we got after Last Crusade.
I actually enjoyed the fifth Indiana Jones.
That I think it was a return to form. My one complaint, and this is nothing against Harrison Ford. It's just the truth of the matter is I think it's just hard to enjoy an Indiana Jones movie when he's 80 years old. Like it's kind of it's just
Fair.
the whole time you're just rooting for him to be able to like make it through the scene.
Yeah. Does not help.
And so, that's just the nature of it, right? It's like when you try to revisit something 30 years later, they're not going to have the exact same vitality. It's going to be inevitably going to be a rumination on aging and getting older.
Which is why we got Star Trek: The Next Generation instead of the original series continuing.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts for people who are looking at sequels like Indiana Jones. Not that any of them listen to us. Have you done any work writing or producing anything for live action shows? And would you like to? I looked through your IMDb and I didn't identify immediately, but I didn't know a lot of what you had done, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I actually started in live action.
Okay.
In college, I started as a producer for PBS actually, and then
cool.
And then I in college I got into doing a lot of live theater and sketch comedy and that sort of thing, and then I started making short films. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, I got a job at a company called National Lampoon, who obviously do like Animal House and the Vacation movies and that sort of thing. And so they had just started up a college television network, which aired in like the closed circuit TV of 300 college campuses. And so we would do like sketches and half hour programs that were sort of like talk soup and that sort of thing.
Well, that's a callback.
Yeah, I know. The soup, it doesn't exist in any form anymore, I don't think. But
I don't think so.
Yeah. Strangely, that starred Kato Kaelin, and I still don't know why.
Yeah. No one knows why Kato Kaelin did anything, I think.
Right. But then in terms of narrative stuff, one of the first live action gigs that I got was I moved out to LA, and I've been out here for a couple of years, and then my manager sent me to meet with a company called Waterman Entertainment that they had done the Stuart Little movies. And the live action CGI Alvin and the Chipmunks movies. So they're kind of their bread and butter was taking beloved intellectual property and turning them into CGI hybrids, live action hybrids, which was, I guess, a ghost of things to come, because that's what anybody does anymore now. But at the time, it was somewhat novel. And I went in there and met with them with my writing partner at the time. And they had a big binder full of IPs that they had the rights to, and one of those IPs was this old Disney film called The Brave Little Toaster that I think they had gotten the rights to the book that it was based on, and they were interested in doing like a live action feature. And so I saw that and I was like, oh, how interesting! And I went on this sort of tangent about how I watched that movie a ton when I was younger, and it had a lot of really relevant and salient themes about taking care of what you have and those in your life and the evils of planned obsolescence. And I walked out of there and they were like, I don't know what you said, but they want you to write the Brave Little Toaster movie. so that was my first big break. The movie never got made. It was stuck in development turnaround while they were looking for financing. But that was some of my that was the first, I guess, live action feature that I'd written. So and then I did work on the forthcoming Transformers 1, which is all animated, but a lot of it was with people with like ping pong balls on them, up at Industrial Light and Magic. So I guess in that way, it was sort of live action.
Yeah.
But I'd love to keep doing it.
Mhm.
So, what would you say is your favorite piece of non-Trek work that our listeners should go watch right now?
Oh, that should be your non-Trek work. Excuse me.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes.
that's yes, because it follows up on what you of the things that you have done that are not Star
Sure.
Trek, because we assume our listeners have seen your Star Trek.
Oh, yes.
What should they go watch right now?
I mean, assuming that they like Star Trek Prodigy, they would probably really enjoy Troll Hunters on Netflix
Okay.
and the Tales of Arcadia trilogy. I worked on the first installment. It was a series produced by Guillermo del Toro as sort of science fantasy action adventure series, YA themed. We kind of wrote it like one long 80s movie to give you a sense of the vibe. So it's about a young teenager named Jim Lake Jr. who he's riding home from school one day and stumbles across an enchanted amulet that inadvertently bonds to his soul and makes him the protector.
Hate when
Yes,
that happens.
inadvertently makes him the protector of humanity against the secret world of fantasy creatures that live beneath their small suburban town. It goes to some very emotionally raw and surprising places, not unlike Star Trek Prodigy. And most people love it because it feels like a Pixar movie or an Amblin movie when you're watching it. So, I have yet to hear somebody who's watched Troll Hunters after watching Prodigy or vice versa not like it. So you'd probably
Fair
like
enough.
it. Go check it out. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we know you got to wrap up soon here, so we'll finish with what are you working on right now that you can tell us about, and please let it be Prodigy season 3.
Well, that I can tell you about.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that's. I wish I had that shirt that Jonathan Frakes has. That's like tell it to my NDA or whatever.
I'm
Don't
gonna
ask
read
me.
between
I
the
signed
lines on that.
an NDA.
Yeah, don't ask me. I signed an NDA.
Yeah, I'm gonna take that to mean that Prodigy season 3 is well in development. Yeah.
Maybe
I do have some very cool projects in the works. I'll put it that way.
Excellent.
Good.
I don't think any of them have been publicly announced yet, but hopefully at some point people can check them out.
That
In
is
the
the
meantime-
nature of the world today.
Yeah.
You never can know what a creator is working on until it gets officially announced.
Yeah. In the meantime, though, you can definitely. I always try to keep people up to date on any cool stuff that I have that does get announced, news or anything of that nature. So you can always follow me on the socials. Pretty much everything from the app formerly known as Twitter through Threads or Blue Sky or whatever. I have a presence at all of them. It's at Good Aaron, GOODAARON. So if you follow me at any of those places, you can definitely you'll be the first to know as soon as I could talk about them.
Very good. Very cool. Yes. All right. Well, the other last question was where can listeners find you? So we covered that.
Oh,
I'll just say thank you so very much for joining us today and answering all of our random questions.
Hey, my pleasure.
Thad, where can people find you when you're not reminiscing about great books from your youth?
Best place to find me is also on Twitter. I am at Tyrannicus. That's TYRANICUS. You can also find me in varying degrees of onlineness at the other social places with the same username. You can hear me on the podcast I do with my friend Carl called License to Spiel. That's license spelled with a C like the British do it, where we talk about various movies and TV shows we want to talk about. Chrissie, where can people find you when you're not playing a Mario game?
Oh, I do that a lot. As I have said, every new iteration of Nintendo I have purchased specifically to be able to play the original Super Mario Brothers on it. So, Right. So yes, in addition to here on Infinite Diversity, you can find me on History with the Szilagys here on the BQN. That's going to be back to twice weekly now that school started up again, and you'd think we would have too much to do, but having that nice set schedule makes it easier to get it out there. So those are going to be back as of this week, actually last week as you're listening to this. And that is that short history podcast I do with my fellow historian partner Jason. And I'm also happy to chat about our shows in the BQN Collective on Facebook, and I am on the various socials at the Goddess Livia. That's TheGoddessLivia, where you can see my opinions about Star Trek history and leftist politics.
Don't forget all the other great shows we have here on BQN. Here's a recording of Amy Nelson to tell you all about them.
What shows are on BQN, you ask? Well, here's a rundown of some podcasts you might be interested in. All Good Things, a Star Trek Universe podcast covering all of Trek, hosted by Amy, Mark, Christos, Kelvin, and Kristen. Whether you've got Xbox or Nintendo, check out Bargain Bin Gamer, a YouTube show hosted by Davey, a self-proclaimed gamer who specializes in reviewing and showcasing affordable video games. 2 episodes enter the arena, 1 comes out victorious. Join hosts Joe and Kevin and a guest as they debate which should win the Batleth battle. Grab your popcorn as you listen to Cinema Z, a film discussion and review podcast showcasing films you probably missed but should definitely check out. Hosted by Mark and Matt. Don your apron for The Food Replicator, where Matthew eats and drinks his way through the Star Trek cocktail and 3 cookbooks. Beam Aboard Galaxy Class, a Star Trek Next Generation podcast covering all of TNG, hosted by Steven. In order to not repeat it, listen to History with the Szilagys, a snippet of historical events from around the world, hosted by Chrissie and Jason. For the newest Trek coverage, check out Infinite Diversity, hosted by Chrissie and Thad. Curl up with a good book and delve into Beta Canon with Peter, host of the online Trek Book Club on Twitter, and his new companion, Trek Book Club podcast. Test your Trek knowledge with Treksperts Quiz, a Star Trek quiz show hosted and written by Davey. Whether you're a member of Starfleet Federation or Planetary Union, go check out Union Federation, covering current Star Trek and the Orville, which we all know is really a Trek show, hosted by Kyle, Kevin, Amy, and Haley. Head over to YouTube and watch The View Screen live on Sundays, your Trek-inspired talk show hosted by Kelvin and Amy, with Season 2 starting in September for a 10-week run. Spill the tea with Christos while he discusses current Trek news and events and explores the world of fandom via guest interviews, all with a LGBTQIA+ perspective on what's the tea about. And for our Patreon members, we have the Hive Mind with monthly script readings, Let's Fly, a Discovery reaction show, It's Green, a cornucopia of topics, Amy's Math Moments, a quick look at math moments in Star Trek. We know you have a choice of podcasts to choose from, and we thank you for listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Infinite Diversity. Thank you to Zach Tripp for the wonderful theme music and Mark White for the awesome show art. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast player, and don't forget to rate and review us there as well.
If you want to reach out, you can find the network on the socials at BQN Podcasts, or our show specifically at IDIC Podcast. You can also talk about any and all of the BQN podcasts in our Facebook group, the BQN Collective, or join our Discord server. When you next hear from us, we'll probably be talking about Lower Decks, but it'll be a few months. Until then, peace and long life.
See you on the other side, diversifiers.